Hello, Endeavor here. So tonight we're going to have a live stream, and it's going to be a general conversation about just the various things that have been going on with the with right-wing politics and the culture war, the media, the deplatforming, and such stuff recently. Just kind of the state of things. And I guess I'll start by posing a question to the guys I have here, because there's been something on my mind recently, and what that's been is the idea of positive and negative legitimacy. So what that is positive legitimacy is, you know, people supporting a ruling class, supporting a regime because of the supposed benefits that it provides them. Whereas negative legitimacy is people supporting it because of the potential threats of not supporting it. And I find that of recently, I get the sense that we're kind of shifting from a positive legitimacy to a negative legitimacy, in that the establishment seems to be pushing more, rather than why it's good to support them. It's why it's bad to, why its enemies are awful. Like, for example, I don't hear the phrase diversity is our strength very much anymore. I don't hear the same rhetoric about multiculturalism or about globalization that much anymore. I hear a lot more rhetoric about, you know, I hear the word like a Nazi and white nationalism and, you know, those various smear words kicked around a lot more often these days. And I get the sense that I find that the establishment really is now really trying to scare people into, you know, away from the kind of populist right-wing movement that seems to be kind of developing. Has anyone else noticed the same thing? I guess I'll ask. I guess I'll ask Academic Agent first. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so my thoughts on this is there are a few things happening. One is that in the story that started in 2016, which I described broadly as a new hope, we are now in The Empire Strikes Back. So that's one thing that's happening. The second thing that's happening is that I think you're right, that there's been a shift, and the ruling class have become what I would describe as openly tyrannical since the start of the year. And there's been a noticeable shift, not just in America, but also on this side of the pond and in Europe as well, where that open tyranny has taken the form of violence in the streets in France every single weekend, where President Macron has been effectively just beating up the yellow vests, and that gets no coverage at all anywhere. And then if you look at the ramping up of the naked kind of uses of power, and you can see it on both sides. So, you know, the Jussie Smollett thing, say, was an example of just somebody getting away scot-free. There's been more firings in academia, for example. There's been, the campaign against Sargon here, which has been, I would say, remarkable in its level of violence, like
Tommy Robinson also.
Yeah, it's like symbolic violence, and I can't work out whether it's a kind of desperate last cling on to power before they get inevitably swept away, or whether the New Hope was a false dawn and we're about to, see the boot come down on all our heads. I cannot work out which way the wind's going to blow, but I'm actually leaning towards being the former for various different reasons, which I can go into later. But let's get everybody else's view first.
What do you think about that, Charles? What's your take?
Well, I think your framing there is interesting in terms of positive and negative legitimacy, and I definitely feel that we're in a phase of negative legitimacy here, where people more or less support the current regime out of fear rather than actual support for it. And like Academic Agent suggested, this all kind of stems from what was happening in the US and Europe with Brexit and Trump. They're basically only trying to say why you shouldn't support these other guys instead of positive reasons why you should support the current power structure. I am kind of curious as well about what Academic Agent referenced in terms of academics being fired. Is there a lot of activity going on there that I haven't picked up on?
There was a dude fired from Cambridge like 2 weeks ago called Noah Carl for doing research into race and IQ, among other things. And there's been, I would say, quite an interesting level of backlash against that decision. So, for example, more academics signed the counter letter to say that Cambridge was wrong than signed the letter to get him fired. So, within academia itself, and I can't go into too many details, but there is a number of reasons to be more positive about what's going on within the ivory tower. And that makes me think if the tipping point is coming in academia, it may be coming in the rest of society, another 6 months down the line or something. So, yeah.
I don't know if it will. I don't know if it will be that soon, but I do actually agree with what you said regarding that. I think the trend is in our favor, although there's a lot of work left to do.
Yeah. All right. Let's get Distributist on here. What do you think about positive or negative legitimacy?
I think this is sort of the China model coming back to us, and that the question is, the West hasn't operated like China. So China basically being the authoritarian, light totalitarian, capitalist unification of social justice concerns in the form of communism with naked techno capital. And I think it's funny because I don't think that the West has ever operated like this. And I think that our elites are testing the waters to see if something that is sustainable in China could be sustainable here. Now, I mean, I don't know exactly, how obviously this is going to cost them. It's costing them in academic credibility, and it's costing them in all sorts of ways. Now the question is how can they pull it off? And if they can't pull it off, how long is it going to be before their collapsed experiment comes back to them? And here I think that academic agents are a little too optimistic. I don't think it's like they lose credibility in the academy and then 6 months later they see a feedback from a consensus. I think that's a little bit. I know things move faster than they did in the 19th century, but even for that's a pretty fast time frame.
Well, the one of the reasons, I mean, there is different contexts here. Obviously, there's some of you guys are Canadian, right? So
I am.
Yeah, and I think there are different contexts in the US and in the UK and in Canada. But there's something else quite big happening here, which is obviously the establishment haven't delivered Brexit. And at the moment, the Brexit party, Nigel Farage's party, is polling. They're winning the European elections that are going to happen. But more significantly, there was a poll released today which has them at 21% for Westminster, and they're not even running. They haven't even announced that they're running for that. The reason that's significant is because in your lexicon, Distributist, the outer party looks like it's under serious threat at the moment because their base, I think over 80% of them want Theresa May gone. They're in like full revolt. They lost over 1,000 seats in the local council elections. There were people, I have heard people say that there were no deal Brexiteers voting for the Lib Dem party or Remain party just to send a message to number 10. So at the moment, there are a lot of Tories who are like, burn it to the ground. They actually want to destroy the party, which is a rapid and I would say slightly unforeseen development.
Which is a huge threat to the establishment, because then it's the endorsed leftist candidate from Labour going against a bunch of parties that the media wants to present as anathema. And at that point, it becomes undeniable that the whole thing is just a one-party affair. You know for a fact that, well, I don't know about UKIP, but you know for a fact that a lot of the right-wing parties in these European elections, just the media and the other establishment parties won't allow them to take any meaningful amount of power. And it just, and if it's the leftist liberal techno capital versus anathema parties, it looks a lot less like a Republican democracy and a lot more like the token anti-communist and against Brezhnev, right?
Well, I mean, to give you some context here, so in the European voting intention polls, and again, these are just polls, but 34% for Farage's Brexit party, 21% for Labour. Don't forget, that's not normal Labour, that's Corbyn Labour. You know, he's outside of the, you know, he's a leftist, but he's still a radical candidate. The Cuck party that was set up, do you know about them?
Is that Brexit Party?
They came up with this name, Change UK, and obviously it's CUK. And now on all of these things, they've become the Chuck Party, because obviously we had a field day calling them cucks for like. But anyway, they are the like the hardcore Remain party, and they're full of like Blairite kind of you know, the ruling class type elites. You know, Anna Soubry and all of these hardcore Remainers who've been very vocal about having the second referendum. They're running. They're currently on 3%. So that just shows you, I think, the mood of the nation. It's like all of these people who've been saying, you'll see, you know, we'll run, it's going to be change coming. And, you know, it's 3% versus 34% for Farage, 21% for Corbyn. All of those are the two change candidates, right? And all of the rest of them are establishment. So I mean, just looking at that, it feels like there's another, it's like 2016 was Act 1. Something else is going to happen soon, and obviously you guys have the election next year. Or
let's get Jacktion in on the Jacktion in on the action. Sorry for the bad pun. What do you think about the state that we're in? You agree with my initial statement that we're kind of in a negative legitimacy phase?
I think we're basically just starting to see the cracks appearing in this fucking myth of democracy. I mean, you've got it in America with Trump and the whole build the wall shit. That's not happening. We had it with Brexit. It was a grand triumph of democracy, and we're nearly 3 years on. Nothing's happening. We've got all of these political parties that have sprung up out of, well, practically from what UKIP was. And they're all sort of vying for control, and it's a case of ego now, and you're splitting a vote between the UKIP, which was the original, and the Brexit party. And the sort of political system we've got in England, splitting the vote isn't going to do anyone any favours. And the whole thing just feels like, it just feels like an absolute joke at this point. And whether or not the Conservatives are losing X many seats, if we know anything, polls aren't really to be trusted. And we're all assuming that, you know, Nigel Farage with his Brexit party is going to swoop in at the last minute and take a grand stand. And they might get a few MEPs, but they don't really get any political power whatsoever. I mean, Nigel Farage, at the point of leaving UKIP, wasn't even an MP for his own constituency. So what they can actually do, I mean, this can be shown as like a sort of, you know, a grand expression of the public's will for a no-deal Brexit, you know, for democracy and what we actually got. But the mandate for the sort of sitting government for it is practically nothing. I mean, the fact that Theresa May is still in, despite the fact that no one likes her, not even her own cabinet likes her, you know, it just sort of shows that what the people vote counts for fuck all in the grand scheme of things. I mean, we can get a war in 5 minutes if we want one, but we can't have Brexit. We can't have, you know, a sensible immigration policy. And this is it's just showing the sort of cracks starting to appear in this this democratic illusion.
But Jack, do you think? I mean, one of the things that I think the BBC have been playing out for years, for absolutely years, I call it like a form of gaslighting, is that they present the opinions of a very small group of what I would call non-ruling elites, the Westminster bubble, the chattering classes, you know. They present the views of those people who I reckon are no more than 10% of the whole public, If you ever watch Question Time or any BBC shows, for years and years, they've been presenting that 10% view as if it's representative of the whole public. And then they present the 90% or the 80% view, you know, what most normal people think, which I'm convinced is close to what Sargon thinks on any number of things, and they present that as being extreme. And I'm just wondering how, like, has it become obvious that trick can't? You know, for me, one of the breaking points was that fucking Swedish kid a couple of weeks ago. You know, this the Greta or whatever her name was. Right now, did anybody who lives outside of like the tiny little area around Westminster genuinely think that looked good? So I don't know any. I haven't met a single person.
Can you clarify what that was?
So about there was something in London called Extinction Rebellion, which is a climate change thing, and it was all of these protesters who went to London, and they were like gluing themselves to lorries and gluing themselves to the sides of buildings and things. And then there's this 16-year-old Swedish girl called Greta Thunberg, who within like a day of coming here was having an audience with like members of the cabinet, you know, on TV with Jeremy Corbyn. Like everybody was just falling over themselves to have a, you know, to be seen meeting her. And then like within a day, everybody was saying, oh, we need to do something about climate change. It's an emergency. Greta said so. And I think most like, honestly, I think like 98%.
I mean, it's sort of like that little girl with Stalin, isn't it? Right.
But I honestly think that I would put the estimate at least 90% of normal people was thinking, what the fuck is going on here? Are you all mental? And I mean, we're talking about Overton window shifting moments. I mean, as more and more things like that happen, as the elites become more and more out of touch with the reality of everyday people, I think they lose more. I mean, I just don't see how they can continue doing this, because something's got to give at the end of the day, right? It's like they could get away with it when they were carrying, you know, half of the people, or, you know, even like 30% of the people. But at the moment, it seems like they've got nobody. And in America, I see the Democrats doing the same thing. Like, who was with the Democrats when that Ilhan Omar was going on about 9/11? You know, it was just some people who did a thing, and then Trump tweeted that thing saying, "We'll never forget." I mean, again, that's got to be like a 5%, 95% issue.
So
yeah, most people don't really like the Democrats. They just hate Trump in terms of the people that are nominally on their side.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a difference between like I'd say a wedge issue is something like abortion, right? Like where it may fall 50-50 or 60-40 or, you know, give or take. But stuff like these aren't wedge issues. These are issues where there's a firm majority of the public on one side of the question, and a very distinct group of smug elites on the other side. Am I wrong?
Yeah, I mean,
that's right. Yeah,
I do kind of have a hard time believing. I know I'm more accustomed to this now than I used to be, but it's just when I read the mainstream media, it's just like I have to see through it quite easily, because like, for example, they invented the phrase Easter worshiper. And I mean, and everyone knows that, you know, the attack in Bangladesh, which, I mean, you know, it's on the other side of the world. It's not one that is very close to home for us. But when you have all these politicians tweeting out the phrase Easter worshiper, and I mean, it's pretty clear that there's you know, some kind of coordination going on. I mean, do you guys think it's easier to see that these days, or do you?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think the internet has made the coordination more apparent, not just because we can see things like Journalist, where they actually do get together and go like, let's all say X, Y, and Z, but because they're literally just copy pasting.
Mm-hmm.
The news is copy pasta. The talking points are copy pasta. Like, it's, I don't know what, like, it's obvious because of the fact there's a little function on the computer we can literally copy. Whereas in previous times, people had to actually rewrite these things in order to avoid plagiarism.
See, the problem you've got is you're all assuming everyone else has the same sort of level of digging into things as we do.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Well, yeah, the common man, especially in sort of the UK, when the BBC starts parroting bullshit, they leave the BBC because, okay, you can recognise the absolute obvious wank that is coming out of them, but they don't then turn to sort of alternative sources. They don't sort of look at, you know, alternative political opinions. They'll go over to something like the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail will parrot the same sort of thing with a slightly different slant. And when people say like, "Oh, Sargon made rape jokes and all that," and Sargon said this, Sargon said that, they're not going to sit there and dig through the context. People haven't got time for that. People have got work. People have got kids. Underestimating the power of the media is incredibly fucking dangerous, especially when, well, there are external influences on the media, shall we say, but underestimating the power and the sort of money behind the media to sort of change the Overton window, change the talking points, whatever way they see fit, is a really bad idea. We can look at Greta Thunberg and say, "Oh, it's absolute bollocks." But when the headline says, "Our Swedish team points out that 90% of us will be dead because of plastic in the rivers," or something, most people aren't going to sit there, go to a scientific study and say, like, "Okay, plastic pollution is a problem. It's coming from India and China." They're going to look at that and go, "Oh shit, we really need to do something."
But Jack, I mean, their tactics have worked for a very long time. I would say, at least since like
But they're still
the
working
mid-60s.
though.
I am not sure if they. I think what's happening is that one is they're desperate, and two, I think they're overreaching at this point. They're overreaching. Like I refuse to believe that the vast majority of people in Britain, America, or anywhere were all right with Easter worshippers, or were all right with
define all right.
Well, I mean, even those images coming out of New Zealand when that happened, okay, the optics were weird. The optics were strange on that whole event, and I'm sure even if they didn't articulate it, it probably registered as a little bit, because I mean, I feel like we've shifted more into that phrase people are using, clown world, but it's kind of apt for this.
No, clown world is absolutely correct. That's the emotion that we're feeling.
It's apt for this current moment, and I think the more people register that, than you might realize.
I have an online friend who said he read a positive article today on the emergence of Down syndrome drag queens, and he's like, well, the only emotion I can legitimately come up for this is clown world. I mean, how do you want me to react to Down syndrome drag queens, right?
Well, that's why the meme is popular. I mean, most memes like clown world become popular because they're actually really, really accurate.
I guess the question is like, because I get what Jackson's saying, that the average person isn't, I guess, as accustomed to looking into things, and a lot of people will just accept what they're told as the truth, and I mean, I guess the big problem is that there is the lack of information, and deplatforming is gonna be a big issue in that regard. But I do get the sense, though, that like the message being sent out is one that's a lot more desperate. Like, when here's an example from Canada, actually, that just happened this past week. Was there's this rat in Toronto named Evan Balgor. He works for this organization called Anti-Hate Canada. It's our version of the SPLC, or Hope Not Hate. And I blocked him on all my social media, but he took Faith Goldie to court over her election donations to have her audited for her personal expenses or something like that. Mm-hmm. And basically what they had done was they had people who had made large donations in Toronto to Faith Goldie's campaign. They had their addresses published, actually. So not only do they know who donated to her, but they know their address too. And for me, what it sounds like is intimidation. It's that they're creating this kind of narrative of the alt-right neo-Nazi boogeyman kind of archetype, and this is like a way of like exposing who supports this supposed boogeyman. And I've seen a lot more intimidation tactics coming from the establishment of late. Has anyone else noticed that?
I mean, the transition you're talking about is a real phenomenon.
Yeah,
we are seeing more of this.
I mean, it's naked and obvious, and I think they're. I mean, I think they're ramping up for. I think they're thinking, shit. If, in America, if Trump wins again, or if we lose a couple more in Europe, if once the Tories are gone in the UK, or once Macron is gone in France, the map is like if you think about it as a Cold War thing, and you see it as globalists versus nationalists, the map is starting to look dire for them. Like, who have they got left apart from Trudeau, Macron, and our lot? And
yeah, but the problem is these faults. I mean, we can all think this, and we can all be sort of red pilled on the issues and whatever, but these faults aren't actually translating to action. They're not translating to political parties. I mean, the sort of closest thing we've got to the right wing as a legitimate party in the UK is maybe For Britain, which is a fucking slogan. It's not a party. It's a shambles. None of this is actually translating.
I think it is, though.
I don't think it is. There's a populist.
Jack, I'm talking about, if you look at the global trend, I'm counting Salvini in Italy, Bolsonaro in Brazil, the dude Kurz in Austria, Orban, Putin to an extent, although he's obviously a slightly different case, but Trump. You start looking at the map. The GOP is Trump's party now. They've kind of, like, you don't hear from the Mitt Romneys and stuff so much these days. National Review has come around. Compare where they are now to where they were 2 years ago, or even a year ago. So I do get the sense that there has been progress in a nationalist direction in all of those places, and of course it's going to be more difficult in the UK. In this country, they've been at it for what, 200, 300 years. They're masters they're absolute masters at this sort of stuff, and they're even losing it here. I'm not saying it's significant.
I think my take is that there's certainly a demand for an alternative, but I mean, I don't know if I don't, like, for example, like Trump, for example, he hasn't really been able to get done the nationalist policies that he promised, and I see countries like basically what I see is that there's a demand for it now, but there really isn't. It's not really manifesting itself in an effective way, and I kind of see the clampdown right now, maybe as a kind of way to choke the baby in the crib.
Yeah, definitely. Because once someone succeeds in creating one of these alternative parties that shows that actually this can survive and sustain itself, and the cathedral can't do anything about it, people are just going to flock to it. So they have to, as you say, strangle the baby in the crib before people see what can be done.
But there's two parts of this, and it's not going to be one in one election or overnight. Okay.
Nope, it's a process.
Right. It's one thing to get the political power. So Trump's got the office, or Salvini has, power in Italy, for example. It's another thing to take over what I would call the non-ruling elites, or the cathedral, as you guys said. That's the next step. The cathedral needs to be won back, or pushed back, or replaced, or something needs to happen there. Otherwise, there won't be any change. And in Britain, that means, gutting a kind of very, very entrenched civil service, places like the Foreign Office, the utter rot in some of these places that are completely stock full of SJW kind of doctrine, and have been for quite a number of years at this point. That's not going to change overnight. They're going to dig in. They're going to do whatever they can.
Yeah, I think that's a lot bigger of a battle than the elections, I find.
It might take 10, 15, 20 years. Who knows?
Almost certainly
has a precedent for this.
Well, the problem right now is it's not like no one really has an idea of how to purge these institutions of these bad actors. In order to even talk about implementing it, we'd have to have an example of it being done on a small scale, and no one's done that yet.
We do have an example, but no one really wants to mention it. That's the problem with it. But the thing is with Italy and perhaps Spain, even Greece, they have a sort of precedent for this kind of thing. We don't. We've always described authoritarianism, especially the authoritarian right, as to be the ultimate evil. And we've memed ourselves into believing this so much that our populist parties are bringing around terms like Islamofascism, so that any sort of connotation of anything more authoritarian than sort of right of centre now has a connotation of being like an Islamic movement. That's the sort of situation that we're in. We're in the Weimar Republic, but without a solution.
I would say as well, we do have some, I guess, economic examples of people opting out of converged media. You see this happen a lot in movies when they go full on social justice. They tend not to do as well. So that can serve, I suppose, as a sort of example for how you can deal with these problem people, is just to not pay them, just stop paying them.
Someone else will pay them. You're relying on a capitalist framework to sort of dismantle capitalism.
Yeah, I don't think it's enough by itself, but it defunding, just opting out of funding these people as much as possible is, I think, part of the solution.
And the other thing I find interesting, though, is when I look at the organizations like Anti-Hate Canada, Hope Not Hate, and these organizations, one thing I find very interesting is lumping the yellow jackets in France in with the far right that they generally target. And like, and a good example of this is, if anyone saw that, which I thought was shocking, that CBS show that had the trailer that literally the guy said that it was a good thing to punch Richard Spencer. If you're interested in that, Blackpilled made a review of the episode, and it's really fascinating if you actually watch it, because they're essentially saying that the solution is to political violence against kind of the populist nationalist right is justified. That was really the kind of message of that episode. But one thing the thing I found the most interesting, though, in that was that the episode had like this caricature of Richard Spencer, and they had his kind of like posse was called the Red Vests, which obviously was playing off the Yellow Vests. And I really find it interesting that these days, to be considered, far right or hate or whatever these organizations consider to be hateful, you just have to be someone who's disgruntled with the status quo. Because I mean, the Yellow Vest is not a left-wing movement, but it's also not a right-wing movement. And does anyone else find that the kind of the hate label or the far right labels kind of just being applied to anyone who's really just kind of dissatisfied with the status quo right now?
You can see.
Yeah, I think so.
You can see it from the fact that the whole thing had to kick off under the guise of fuel taxes. No one could actually turn around and say that, this is because our country has been absolutely fucking flooded with, third world migrants, because they would have been shit on straight away. The media would have cracked down on them, as in the neo-Nazi group or what have you.
It's also strategically to their advantage to lump all enemies into one group, so that anyone opposing one part of it is effectively opposing all of the people, quote, on the right at once.
Yeah, because I mean, like I said, like I just find like a lot of people that wouldn't even really be considered right wing in many situations are kind of being lumped in with the right when they're just show dissatisfaction with the status quo, really. And I think that in many ways that is a good thing, because kind of our neck of the woods becomes a voice of opposition to for really anyone who's really just pissed off right now. And there's a lot of people, and I kind of think that that's one of the reasons that they've kind of shifted away from the positive propaganda, positive legitimacy towards the negative legitimacy.
One of the things Farage has done, which is quite interesting, is that he's enlisted self-proclaimed left-wingers and lifelong left-wingers as part of the Brexit Party. And now when the establishment turn around and call those people far right, they're like, what? So it's kind of, I actually wonder if we'll see another shift, that they've used far right and that they've tried to use white supremacists more and more. I just wonder, as these things lose any meaning at all, whether they'll invent a new thing, I mean,
I don't think you can really invent anything new that's more effective than the idea of like Nazi and white supremacy,
Well, what does it mean at this point, though? Like they've literally called
I
everybody
mean,
from
it's
bloody.
never meant anything. That's kind of the point.
But
Yeah.
I mean, when they've called like Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, like someone as milk toast as that, you know, far right or fascist and all this sort of thing. All of these people have been called this at this point.
That
It's
doesn't.
like, well, does it still? I just wonder if it still registers, or if it's just like calling, you know, if it just has the weight of calling someone, you know, like a Tory or something.
No, I
You know
think
what I mean?
I think it's still more powerful than that, but I think you're right that the rhetoric is decreasing in power, but I don't think there's anything they could come up with that would be more effective. You know, accusing someone of white supremacy or whatever is pretty much
Well,
the most powerful attack they can make.
I actually think they are being forced to ramp up. So if you have a look at the campaign against Sargon, it went from he made a rape joke to literally he's a pedo who likes to who'd be all right with you know, sleeping with underage kids or something. That's like the Sun literally ran a headline accusing Sargon of being like a pedo sympathizer, which
Okay,
is
fair enough.
which I think is the next. I think that shows where they have to go to, though.
I think that's going to backfire for obvious reasons, though.
But that works if you go under the assumption that they think Sargon is a threat. Nobody is scared of the centrists. Nobody is scared of classical liberals. What they fear is the far right, because the pendulum, the one sort of political theory that does hold weight is the pendulum theory. In times of crisis, you swing far right or far left. And by diluting the far right with Sargon of Akkad, Katie Hopkins, Tommy Robinson, all you do is you muddy the far right into this bizarre sort of neocon movement. You move the Overton window so far to the left that someone like Nigel Farage, Sargon, Tommy, they can be considered far right. That's the threat, not so much these people. And the establishment knows this. They're not.
But that's they want that. That's victory recognition for them.
Yeah, but it's not the case that they view these people as far right for a second. They know that the far right are the sort of, you know, the Oswald Mosley types. They're the sort of people that you don't want to fuck around with. This is just a sort of grand tactic. And the problem is going back to what I said about the media, people are going to take this in their stride and they're going to see far right politician this, far right politician that. Viktor Orban, for example, is branded far right for having a sensible immigration policy, for not being slave to certain international elements. That is apparently far right. That is how far to the left we've shifted. And that is the real threat. It's not Sargon. It's not Tommy. The ball is very much in their court.
Well, I mean, I would argue though that while yes, I would agree that, you know, Sargon isn't far right, but I would say though that one of the reasons they are a threat is because they are still going against a narrative that is very tenuous at this point, because you know, they can't really afford any of the pushback against even just, you know, the political correctness and even or even just talking about things like Islam. That's something that's very difficult for them to handle right now. And even if it's coming from someone who's, you know, more or less a centrist, it's still it still seems to be either a problem for them, or that they've kind of just gone to such an extent that basically anyone who brings that up is far right. I don't know. But I mean, it does seem pretty clear that they don't want any real pushback against anything, even if it's moderate.
I mean, I will say, I mean, Endeavour, you and I talked the other night about the myth of the Second World War. Some of the foundational myths. Do you remember we talked about that?
Yes, we did.
One of the things that I think one of the myths that I think is still incredibly strong, and when I say strong, I reckon maybe 95% of people, intellectuals, people on the left, right, center, you name it, normies, people in our sphere, people I talk to all the time. One of the myths that it is going to be very difficult to break is democracy itself. Now, I, for very different reasons, possibly to some of you guys, I do not think democracy is necessarily correlated with freedom. I think that's one myth. It's not correlated with economic prosperity. That's another myth. And I also think that it's It's basically just another name for socialism. So I'm a like from my classical liberal or libertarian perspective. I just think you could have Hong Kong or Singapore or Chile under Pinochet or something. All of those were perfectly functioning places without democracy. It's not a precondition for anything. But you try saying that in any sort of company at all, and I think you'll get a huge amount of pushback.
I disagree with that, actually. I was just having a conversation a few days ago with my mostly normie sort of leftist friend, and I basically explained to him like Moldbug's system of patchwork and the transition to that, and he was pretty much just cool with it. I think the myth of democracy is kind of wearing off, honestly, even amongst kind of normal people.
Yeah, I think that at the present day, I think what people need to understand is that it's really just not functioning in the way that they say it is. Because I'd add to that you had stated that democracy is not essential for freedom. It's not essential for prosperity. I'd also say it doesn't really even it's not even essential for autonomy or consent of the governed or any of that stuff, because it claims to be a system that delivers that, but that really isn't the case. And I mean, it kind of, that is just highlighted by the way what we've been discussing, how like the media is just able to spin a societal narrative in such a way that regardless of who you vote for, that narrative will be enforced, because there's all this unelected power being wielded by these various arms of the state. And
okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I just want to know what people think the solution to this is, because I just think that the right's been fundamentally going about this the wrong way. I think that if we're switching to hard power, like you say, Endeavor, then the right is in a mode where it has to play the legitimacy game. It has to create sort of the mood that the left created around homosexuality and other things like that in the 80s and 90s. And that's the game it has to play. Winning political victories is really, I don't want to say it's unimportant, but it's just not the game we're playing. I think the message we have to get out there and get out there loudly is it's okay to be right, and this is the quest of the right wing is to essentially defend our existence and to ask for a seat at the table.
Well, I mean, it's more than that. I think the most important thing that we have to do is to wrest moral authority away from them.
I think that's a precondition, right? I mean, how are you right? Yeah. We don't even have moral authority to speak right now.
But what I mean is, at the moment, I mean, again, you've got to remember where we are. Okay, we're in Britain. We're still in a place where, like Roger Scruton, right? He was just fired immediately by the Tory party when
that was shameful.
Shameful. But Douglas Murray, amazing guy, attacked. Scruton didn't apologize, and they took.
Douglas Murray attacked him.
Douglas Murray attacked the guy who did the smear job on Scruton, exposed him to be a liar, exposed it to be slander, showed the Tories to be utterly cucked, and basically, I mean, okay, Eastland hasn't got his job back, and the lefty journalist hasn't been fired, but basically he's made sure that he's probably never going to work again. Nobody's going to hire him. But this is important, right? Because we're dealing, when it's the current left, we're dealing with people who are actually despicable, actually like morally repugnant. And I think it's really important that all of the right finds the backbone enough to use like morally charged language when speaking to these people. If you watch somebody like David Lammy in this country or fucking Cory Booker, okay, they do not speak without some sort of moral charge, without some sort of moral attack. And that's one of the things, I mean, whichever way it goes, that has to happen. And it's one of the things that the people who've been successful, Salvini, Trump, Farage in this country, that's what they do. They never cuck, and they do not accept the moral kind of framework from which the left are coming, because there's no other way to break it, because otherwise we're coming from a place where we're accepting all of their crap, right? All of their all of their artificial moral compass and framework, which we all know is just not true.
Right, and not only just reject it, but to go a step further and make people disgusted by some of the left's propositions.
See, back to the World War II myth. I mean, there are a lot of myths around World War II, but the problem you've sort of got is when you present these arguments, there's no real precedent that you can use to turn around and say this is the alternative, because anything far right is automatically Nazi. Anything vaguely authoritarian, unless it's coming from the modern conservative government, is fascist. And that's the sort of game we're playing. It's not the fact that these people don't know that what they're saying is inherently immoral. I don't believe for a minute that these politicians that talk about importing the third world and that kind of thing, I don't think for a second that they believe that this is a good thing. But the problem is they don't care, and at the moment they hold the power. And we can all think this and we can all talk about it, for now anyway. But the problem is it's not translating to an actual action.
I think the answer is that basically what we need is organization. And I've said this before. It's obviously easier said than done. And because the problem is that people can't be comfortable saying these things when there's really no backbone to support them. I mean, they might get some retweets on Twitter, but at the same time, if you can lose your entire job, if you can be kicked off the platform, well, that's not really much of a consolidation.
This answers your question about sort of legitimacy, is that people, as a rule of thumb, won't have a problem. If you sort of describe a socialist point, but in a nationalist framework, a lot of people don't have a problem with it. But the minute the sort of media jumps in and says, well, that's National Socialism, that's Nazism, that's when it becomes a problem. A lot of people are far more receptive to it until it gets past that sort of, acceptable point of a bit of banter in the pub. And that's the thing we've got to sort of fight against the most, is you're not going to win this with the academics. You're not going to win because the academics are fucked. The academics are so sort of, so far to the left at this point that this is how Nigel Farage, Sargon, they get deplatformed off campuses. Milo Yiannopoulos is somehow a Nazi. This is what you're sort of relying on.
The group of dissident academics are starting to organise in quite
how dissident though?
Pardon,
how
sorry.
Are they actually? Are they?
Well, I mean, with the ways and means here. I mean, I think in terms of where you may want to go, I'm only guessing here. Probably no.
Disagree. From you saying you're libertarian, I can have a solid guess at me and you will disagree in which way we want to go.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in terms of what where you may be getting at, I think the system, first of all, needs to try to reassert the legitimacy of democracy, first of all. So like Farage, for example, him and all of the people running in that party are running, quote, for democracy first and foremost, right? Or like Trump and his supporters, it's going to be for democracy first, right? So that there's not going to be any question about. I think, I mean, this stream is called the Overton window. I think any question marks about democracy being the system is still very far outside the Overton window. I mean, I don't know if other people disagree with me on this, but I just think it's not even in the top 20 talking points of most people, including those academics, and including like any of the people we've mentioned, including like Salvini or Bolsonaro. They're not going to become like fascist dictators. That's what I'm saying.
I think it just depends on who you talk to. I mean, you'd be surprised how little just regular people actually care that much about the political system overall. Like, they just want to live good lives and be left alone for the most part. And
I disagree. You go to any sort of pub in England and you can find a man like the sort of whole the way I sort of come about my sort of political point of view was pretty much arguing with people in pubs. And it comes to the point where they say, oh, you're a fascist. And then you can phrase the exact sort of same beliefs that you had, especially to the working class. Like if I say I believe that the government should be fucking absolutely cracking down on Islamic hate preaching. I believe that the government should be enforcing British values. I go, oh yeah, that's good. But the minute you call it fascism, which to the point where I would take it is probably a fair assumption, that's when they sort of recoil. And that is the sort of power of the media. That is the way we have been. It's like a Pavlovian response. The minute we hear fascism, we think, oh, Hitler, oh, genocide.
I mean, that's kind of why it's kind of a label that I think people should kind of not use. I mean, like, for example, I've read The Doctrine of Fascism. I liked some things of it. I didn't like other things of it, but I would never say I'm a fascist because of this, because like you said, it kind of just discredits you right off the bat.
I mean, one thing I will say is that I do think, in terms of the winning formula for most of the public, is what I would call economically populist. That is, economically to the left, or using kind of more state power. I think that will attract votes for obvious reasons. And I think on social issues like socially conservative, socially, anti-immigration, I think the winning formula in most countries is those two things, which is kind of where Le Pen is in France, or kind of where Salvini is in Italy, and kind of where Trump is, to be honest.
I might disagree with you that Trump is there, but yeah, I would agree that is kind of the 2 points that I'd like to hammer home.
I think people want to be safe more than anything. I think people want to know that their government is there for them, and that their sort of
that's a very legitimate
policies are there for them. People don't want to be getting on the tube and going to work and paying their taxes knowing that someone's going to fucking blow them up, and then the next thing in the news is going to be, oh, it's not all Muslims, it's not all this, it's not all that. Let's hold hands and fucking sing Don't Get Back in Anger, or whatever the song from. Don't Look Back in Anger, that's it.
Yeah,
that's not what people want. People want to be safe. They want to know that they can raise a family and go home to them at the end of the day. Economics comes very much second to a government actually looking out for you. And I think there is a point, like Mussolini said, men will get tired of freedom. I would be quite happy to say, let's say, trade going out past 11 o'clock, knowing that I can go to work without getting fucking blown up. This is the sort of point we're at. This whole sort of give me liberty or give me death thing is a false analogy.
Well, I think that the problem comes from kind of a perversion of what the word freedom means, because and this is kind of another one of these issues that we're going up against, and maybe this is also derived from the same foundation myth, which, by the way, I was actually thinking I should have a stream on World War II eventually, but that's for a topic for another time. But
I would love that.
Yeah, well, we'll do that one time. But
can I come on?
Oh yeah, definitely. I'll have all you guys on. But what I wanted to say was that I think that one of the problems is that there's kind of been a perversion of what the word freedom means. Like it seems like it just means these days, freedom to just have no standards whatsoever. It means like freedom to get a sex change when you're 5 years old, or abort a baby 10 seconds before it's born. Where freedom, in my conception of it, is more just like a freedom to be yourself in your own country, and kind of have like a sense of autonomy, really, and the ability to really reach self-actualization. And that's like one of the things that they've really taken is this idea that freedom is just doing whatever you want, and that's kind of one of the big that just seems to be one of the big problems that we have.
They stole the whole black and white. That's the most insidious thing they could have ever done, was to steal the absolute right and the absolute wrong. And that's the true freedom, is you choose right or you choose wrong.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can ever put it, because if you boil it down, it always comes to those two choices. You choose the right thing or you choose the wrong thing. And now everything is a grey spot. Everything needs to be debated. We need to have a fucking discussion about the age of consent. No, we don't. There is very much an absolute right, and there is very much an absolute wrong.
My mother told me a little story about the other day about something that happened when she was a girl, This would have been in the 50s, and she said that there was this like kind of abandoned vicarage in the town that she grew up, and they didn't know that it like kind of still belonged to the church, but there was nobody living there, and they had this fruit bush, and her and like a few of her friends, when they were at age 10, went and like picked the berries, and that got all around that town, and they were called. And she said she went to a shop, and she was 16, so this was been 5 or 6 years later, and they still said, we don't serve thieves here. And I just think if you think of where if you think of where they were as a kind of like the little morality of that little town to where that town probably is right now, it's kind of staggering if you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of is just an example of social cohesion in many ways, that it just seems like a society that has so much more standards. There was actually this really fascinating video that Millennial Woes had made a few years ago. This was when he was talking about the history of the United Kingdom. He made this really fascinating video about this case from Victorian England where these two children who were, I think, like 8 and 6 years old, had murdered another child. And what he talked about was the way that the state went about rehabilitating them, and the way that like the aristocracy and the class and all that stuff really functioned in a way that the people just had so much faith that the society was just healthy enough that it could handle a problem like that, and they could go to an institution and then come out, I guess, rehabilitated people. And yeah, it's just like that kind of sense of standards and that sense of social cohesion is just something that's really died off. And I don't know how you get that back. I'd say that the way that you have to get that back is, again, through you need some kind of mechanism to actually be able to uphold some form of good. And if we're going to have that, I think we need organizations that are going to do that. I know I said that. Yeah, we need churches that'll actually enforce some kind of morality and not really just give into the zeitgeist, really.
Was that that case you were talking about? Was that the James Bulger case by any chance?
I believe so.
Yeah, it was awful. I remember reading about that when I was a kid. It was absolutely fucking sickening. But yeah, you're right in that it sort of speaks to society as a whole. I mean, the whole thing about rehabilitative justice over actual punitive justice that's another big problem is while we're at. I mean, if you go to prison now, I mean, I'd have no real problem in going to prison because I know I'd get a fucking Xbox and a telly and what have you. Back when there was the hangman and the fact of prison being an actual penance, then prison becomes a deterrent. But the sort of fact of the matter is we've got to the point where men especially have forgotten how to live uncomfortably. It's always been the case through history that men have become strong through a little bit of suffering. Now, I'm not talking about starving to death. I'm talking about, having to graft for 14 hours, having to go out in the fields, having to forgo a meal so that your children can eat. And that's the sort of problem that we've got now is we've bought so much into this capitalist idea that every single part of your worth is from what you own and what you earn. And how many people have I heard say, well, I can't afford to have kids? Do they think that their ancestors, their fucking grandfathers who worked in a mill could afford to have 8 children? It's bullshit.
Yeah, I think I actually I misspoke. That's actually not the one I was speaking about was I don't think that was the James Bulger one. It was one from the Victorian era. I can't remember the actual name of the kids. Millennial Woes had done a video about that back in 2015. I found that really interesting. But anyway, we have Faustian Spirit here. I'll also get him in on the discussion. Do you find that the atmosphere just seems so much more vicious as of late in the last months or so with things like deplatforming, the media, and various things like that? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been a escalation or advancement in censorship tactics. Something that came to my attention is the MasterCard issue with the shareholders vote that's coming. to deplatform right wingers. And man, that precedent is established, that not just a credit card processing company, but actual avenues of access to like auto loans, mortgages, etc., your bank account, cashing your paycheck. If they say, well, we label you as a bad man and we're not going to let you use our services, how long is it going to be until they shift it over to, all the other credit agencies? It's something, it's very concerning to me as we go forward. And we've already seen examples of them nuking people's bank accounts. They even closed a church's bank accounts. Pastor Steve Anderson's church. They went after a church, and it's like there's no repercussions for this behavior. In fact, they're getting more and more encouragement and positive reinforcement for it. So I only really see it heating up, especially as we get towards 2020.
I mean,
Yeah.
at the risk of saying something very contentious here, you see, I think we already live in fascism. I genuinely do. In so much as,
I wish.
right? I'll tell you exactly what I mean. So in fascism, if you look at the way the economy worked, the state and the various businesses were in lockstep. Okay, and what we have a situation and have had a situation probably since the 1930s where the state and the various different private enterprises have been in lockstep to basically do what they want and crush any civil liberties they want. It's just not orientated in the way that certain other people who might want fascism want.
I think you're actually fairly accurate there, especially in a technical sense. Like if you read the Doctrine of Fascism or other fascist literature, basically the way the state is supposed to work is in this corporative manner, where you have these corporate experts who manage certain parts of the country and act out all the policy. And that's kind of what we have in this, like, I guess, neoliberal techno-capitalist structure, where basically a lot of the governing and management of the society has just been outsourced to what these corporations think we should do.
Well, one of the things I've never been able to get anyone to do, because I've often said that the US, for example, has been more or less openly fascist since FDR. I've never been able to get anyone else to kind of define like what are the common features of other fascist states that don't conform. Because I look at Mussolini and Hitler and Imperial Japan, and the only common feature is the economic policy that I can see.
I'll have a whack at that if you want.
Yeah, have a go, because nobody's ever been able to give me an answer.
I'll give you it from the working man one, because I don't fuck around with reading philosophy. I don't fuck around with Vola and all that. But the idea of fascism to me is an authoritarian state that is solely, its main mandate is to preserve the culture, the people, and the state itself. So fascism will look very different. I mean, you could have this exact same form of fascism in 3 different countries, but a Japanese state imposing fascism will look entirely different from a British state, because it all comes down to the national identity, the cultural identity, and obviously they are going to be very different. The idea of fascism is authoritarianism, but in service of the people, which is the only legitimate way that authoritarianism should ever be implemented. And be that with a clerical slant like myself, I would be a clerical fascist. As a Roman Catholic, I would be a clerical fascist. It would be a case of imposing Catholic moral order upon a state which would obviously benefit from Catholic moral order. But then you come to the point of corporatism, where you get more into the economics, and fascism can be as much, I mean, I always used to think of it as sort of a straight political ideology.
Yeah, I mean, where I would...
That's where it gets muddied. You can end up with National Socialism. You can end up with capitalist fascism.
You're absolutely right.
Corporatism. which is, I think, what you were mentioning.
Where I would disagree with the statement that we're living in a fascist regime is that the fascist usage of the economy was in service of the nation, and what Mussolini described was that the state was essentially the manifestation of the spirit of the people. The nation was the manifestation of this spirit of the culture, their history, their sense of peoplehood. That's what it was manifesting, and that the corporatism was in the service of that, as I understand it. So
Correct.
You could also argue, though, that what we currently have is the manifestation of our current spirit. But I actually agree with you, Endeavor. I think that distinction would place America not in the fascist category just because the economy is not serving the state.
It's not our spirit, though. That's not our spirit at all. We have never been built on liberty. We've never been built on this fucking idea of egalitarianism. And that's not to say that imperialism...
But America was, so an American form of fascism would kind of highlight those things.
American fascism...
And then give them lots of, like, burgers and football, which is exactly what they got.
American fascism just doesn't work in the fact that it's based on their whole culture, quote unquote, is based on liberty from the British. It's not a real culture. It's not. America is essentially a vassal state that just won independence and doesn't know what the fuck to do with herself.
I will contest that. I do think America does have a culture, but it's one that's been eaten away at.
Yeah, I think what Academic Age is saying is interesting and rhetorically kind of neat, but I think dialectically it's not really true. I don't think it's fair to really call America fascist.
Dialectically, you're using the same tactics as the left, and I don't think you mean to do it, but it's dangerous. You're using.
No, I just genuinely can't see any. I look at the, I always look at economics first. I just look at the structure of the thing.
Don't look at economics first. That's the problem.
Well, I can't. But what are the given that each manifestation is different? The only thing that looks the same is the economic policy.
No,
you have to understand, though, that
economic policy, you don't end up with fascism. You end up with National Socialism. You end up with Phalangism. You end up with Strasserism.
The thing is, fascism doesn't really concern itself with economics specifically, and that's why analyzing a state from an economic perspective to determine if it's fascist or not doesn't really work.
The idea that your people come first, so the economics come second. Your people are always, your economics should serve your people. It's not a capitalist utopia where the people, this bullshit idea of the American dream that ends up in a monopoly with the power to rival a small nation. The idea of fascist economics is that your economics serve your people. It's like, I'll use Nazi Germany as an example because I can't think of another one at the moment, but when the Weimar Republic was absolutely disintegrating every notion of morality that we once held, the right come along and it was a case of the state will give you money to get married. The state will subsidize your honeymoon. There'll be these grand ceremonies. You can go on a Hitler cruise, which costs pennies. Your mortgage will cost pennies. The idea of that was to make the people stronger. It wasn't to make some idea of capitalism or some fucking grand corporation stronger. It was solely in service of the people. It cost the state a fortune. Even Gaddafi. You can make the argument that Gaddafi was close to National Socialism.
So, I mean, I hate to be a pedant here, but when America does things like bends over backwards to keep General Motors open, bailed them out 4 times, bailed out the banks. I mean, what are they doing when they do all these things?
Well, it's more corporatism. That's not necessarily fascism.
Oh, but they're in their own minds. They're doing it to keep people in jobs. They're doing it to keep people in.
They're not.
Well, Academic, real quick. Am I the only American on the panel here?
No, I'm American.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Charles. I don't want to be too Amerocentric, but Academic made a couple of claims that I find puzzling. I don't know how one could conclude that the founding fathers were egalitarian. They were quite not even close. I mean,
no, that's true. But I've always maintained that through Jefferson, there's a little bit of kind of Rousseauian egalitarianism that creeps in, and from there grows in the kind of American vision. So you inevitably end up with the idea of one man, one vote, and universal suffrage thereafter.
I feel like that's kind of
hold
a
on.
flimsy.
Yeah, real quick. What Jefferson wanted in terms of franchisement was for white men, period.
Yeah, I know that's what he meant, but it was inevitably going to end up with universal suffrage. Inevitably.
I disagree.
Catholicism in one way, which is every man is equal in the eyes of God. Everyone is judged equally according to their sins. That's not in the eyes of man. That is never specified in the eyes of man. We all know that not everyone is fucking equal. We all know that everyone, man and woman. All right, we'll go for man and woman. Look at the American fucking military putting women on frontline roles. Great idea that. Someone that's up to 60% less strong than a fighting man. Great idea. That's your egalitarianism. If you want to die on the hill of egalitarianism, then that's how you end up. Because you will always come up against someone that doesn't fucking ascribe to that. And they are always going to be stronger because they dissuade this notion. This is the whole capitalist thing.
Yeah, but I hate to be confrontational here, but if you want true, if you want a true kind of world where a completely anti-egalitarian society, where you do not give any lip service at all to the idea that people are equal, what's the empirical test of that? Like, why are you wanting a big daddy state to look after you if it's a world of real life elites and real life minions? I mean, surely you'd want a system that would be able to separate the wheat from the chaff and let the most productive rule it over the least productive.
But that's what fascism is, though. It's not looking after me. It's allowing me to fulfill my potential without having to fucking suffer the burden of the people that won't work, the people that can't work. I mean, obviously, there's a bit of a duty of...
But how's it doing that when it's literally Hitler saying, we need to dig a road somewhere, go and do it, so you feel... So, it's not a real job, but... go off and do there, so you're not unemployed. It'll look good for my
real job. It serves the wider infrastructure.
But I mean, it's literally just him saying. Realistically, it's him just trying to get an employment stat to zero, and it's no different to saying like go and dig a ditch, go and fill it back in, and there you go. There's a pat on your head. You can feel special. It's not a proper job, though, is it?
That's not.
Because you are building something. When they built the autobahns, it weren't a case of, this will look pretty. It's a case of this will serve the wider German infrastructure. Whether you're getting a wage from the state doesn't mean a thing. The state will pay you if you're worth paying. It's not a case of, the state is just making jobs for the fucking sake of cutting unemployment. This is the case of getting men who are fighting soldiers into something that won't just serve, some corporate interest. It will actually serve the state.
But I hate to bring fact into things, but what did they end up doing? They started fucking World War II. And created a situation where
we can get
Germany
argument.
Seriously, it ended up with Germany. I mean, if imagine those guys could see the state of Germany today and think like, well, this was our doing. This was literally us who did this. But well done for building the autobahn.
Okay.
So we do have to separate something here.
The stormed Normandy and saw the Rotherham gangs. Do you not think they would think the same? We stormed the fucking beaches in Normandy. We jumped off at Juno Beach, and then what? Our children are getting raped by fucking Muslims. Do you think they would not say, you know what? Fuck it. The Wehrmacht have a point. That's a shit argument, mate.
Well, what I'll probably say is that I think that you can pretty much apply that to any state in the West today that regardless of what side they were on in the 20th century, in the early 20th century, I don't think any of them would be happy with the way that the West is today. And something I have been kicking around in my mind is how much of that is due to bad ideology and how much of that is just due to civilizational decay. Because, I was of the opinion for a long time that a lot of the problems that we're facing today are the result of liberalism and the result of the Enlightenment and egalitarianism and stuff like that, which I think is true to a large extent. But the other thing that has kind of crept into my mind is that were these things as bad as I thought they were, or were they subverted? Did they just decay? Because
they've always been.
I stand by all my criticisms I've made of liberalism and democracy and all these systems, but I also do believe that what we're facing today is also a part of kind of a civilizational decay, because you can see this happening in other civilizations in the past, like in Rome, like, for example, I had a stream with On the Offensive on the essay by John Glubb, The Fate of Empires. And what was really interesting that he pointed out in that essay is that there was in the Arab Empire of Baghdad, Islam became progressive. Islam became degenerate as we see the West is today. And I have to think that it's not entirely the ideology, but a lot of that does have to do with civilizational decay. And I think that has set in across the West. And I don't know if there actually is a single ideology that could stop that. So that
I agree.
The problem with this civilizational decay thing is that there's always something driving it. And everyone on this stream knows that we can't speak specifically about what is driving it. There has always been an enemy of order. There has always been an enemy of God. I think, Endeavour, I think you're a Christian, am I correct?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. There has always been, from the start of history, an enemy of this kind of thing. And this is the problem, is we are to the point where we can't even speak it, we can't even whisper it under our breaths. But everyone who's watching knows what the fuck we're on about, obviously.
Okay. Other than the things that we can't talk about, the other thing that I would point out is that I think that a lot of civilizations do just become decadent when they become accustomed to wealth for too long. People become weak when they're just so used to a comfortable lifestyle. And I think a lot of the weakness has to do with that, because, people alive today, hardly any of them lived through World War II. If they did, they'd be extremely old by now. There really hasn't been a threat to any Western nation in the last 70 years or so. And it kind of has made us open the doors to one, because we kind of can't see that happening. And I think that a lot of the problems we face are the result of just becoming soft from too long of a period of comfort.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this is going to happen no matter what. It could be liberalism. It could be something else. I think one interesting piece of fiction that kind of goes towards this line of thinking is the Amazon adaptation of The Man in the High Castle. If you watch the show, what sort of happens to the Japanese and Nazis that they actually start liberalizing, and they basically go through the same process that we're going through. I think what's happening is kind of, like you said, just the fate of empires more than something to do with a specific ideology, because it's not like liberalism took down every previous civilization. It just happens to be what's happening right now.
Yeah. And like we pointed out earlier, the founding fathers never intended the Constitution of the United States, for example, to justify, say, something like abortion. That was something that was decided in 1976, I believe, using a law that the founding fathers had written. It wasn't designed to justify that. And I have a lot of problems with liberalism. I'll be the first to admit that I have a lot of problems with the Enlightenment. But at the same time, I think it's a mistake to think that you just need the right ideology and that solves all the problems, because this is what the proprietarians believe. They think that if you just have the right rule of law, then Western civilization will thrive forever, and then we'll never have to worry about this again. I think a lot of that is the human problem of really just kind of people becoming weak.
I hate to just. Yes, I do agree with some of the Glubb stuff. I think is interesting. But can you just imagine if some of the global supply chains that, your local supermarket or something, if they broke down for a week, what people would do, what you would do? Like if you just went, I mean, some people, if they just went shopping and they didn't have, I don't know, any beef, any chicken or any lamb in the supermarket, it would, things would start breaking down very quickly. So I wouldn't, the network of global trade that supports everybody in the lifestyle to which they've become accustomed. I mean, I don't think people are going to want to give that up easily.
God, you're acting like we never had a fucking empire. If everything broke down and we moved from a service-based industry, we would know how to manufacture. We would know how to farm. We are not going to die from all of a sudden being cut off from globalism.
But
people in cities will.
you're asking people though to reduce their kind of prosperity by
no, we're asking
by a factor of like
consumerism.
No, but when you say consumerism, what you mean is people buying things they want, okay, at affordable price points. That's what you mean.
No, not at all. It's not what I mean at all. I mean sort of the whole idea of factory farming, the whole idea of, every single electronic. You need this, you need that. You do not need it.
People want it.
Learn how to be slightly uncomfortable.
Right, so
history, and it made men stronger.
So what you're saying is you want to make everybody poorer by a factor of about 100.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying,
it is literally what you're saying, though, Jack.
What I'm saying is that we need to remind people that material wealth is not everything. We do not need a fucking smartphone that can do X, Y, Z. I've got the latest smartphone. I use it to make phone calls and fucking use WhatsApp. We've got to the point of sort of technocracy where...
Why don't we start with you then? Why don't you just do away with it all and live on like cabbage and turnips for a few weeks and see how it goes?
I'm a Catholic, mate. I live on Lent. Lent, I can fucking survive on about £4 a week.
So yeah, what I will say is that I think that yes, it's going to be very difficult. I do agree that people do need to cut back on the consumerism and on materialism, and I do think that the West really does need an appreciation for the non-material, and I think that this is going to come whether we like it or not, because I don't think that the economic situation is very stable. Because when you look at things like rent prices, you look at things like wages. I think that we're not going to have a choice within the next 10, 20 years, especially for, people of my generation. I'm a pretty young guy.
Isn't it just because the conclusion I've come to is quite different? I think it's got nothing to do with the economic setup and everything to do with the social setup. So if you go back,
stronger, you can say it's economic. You can use your little words to imply that it's communism and making everyone poorer to bring everyone to an equal point. It's not about that.
How about let me finish my sentence?
Okay, yeah,
let me finish my sentence first, okay? See, I've come to the conclusion that in social affairs, okay, people do need guidance, and I think that's one of the things. Like I've said many times, I think the 60s, the culture, the countercultural revolution, where every single kind of social norm was knocked down, was probably a mistake, and that needs to somehow be put back together. And the difference is that when my mum was growing up, there was a church on every corner. Everybody went to the church, and there was kind of social and moral norms. But the idea, I think, one of the problems is that people in the liberal tradition, they took the idea of spontaneous order very literally, but it doesn't happen on its own. It needs people. It needs leaders. It needs priests. It needs somebody to guide. To give you some kind of moral, spiritual guidance, and that will help things along, right?
Sorry, are you still a libertarian, just out of curiosity?
Well, I mean, being a libertarian means believing in free markets. It doesn't say anything about your social.
I would tend to agree with that. That I don't think that necessarily a materially wealthy civilization is going to be a decadent one if there actually is a strong social order. I mean, you can look at the United States in the 1940s, 1950s, or the United Kingdom in the 19th century. These were extremely wealthy civilizations. They were extremely wealthy states, but they had a sense of they had a sense of morality, though. They had a strong culture around it.
And that's what I'm saying. It's not make everyone poorer. I'm not saying let's be a fucking communist and redistribute the wealth. What I'm saying,
I know you're not saying that.
you need to remember how to suffer a little bit.
But
There's an idea
the thing is,
you have to make sacrifice. Hang on a minute.
Yeah.
This is why women abort their fucking children for the sake of a career. No. If a man knows how to suffer a little bit, a man knows how to fucking get out, do a graft, pay for his children, that is the ultimate fucking goal of a man. He doesn't have to be rich. He doesn't have to be famous. He needs to provide for his wife and provide for his children. This is not the same of, let's make everyone poor. This is the case of, in a society where if you do want any form of egalitarianism, someone is always going to be at the bottom. That's a fact of hierarchy. That's a fact of liberalism. That's a fact of capitalism. There is always going to be someone at the bottom. What we need to do is remind that man that he has a higher purpose to his wife, to his children, and to his God. That is the case of it. It's not a case of let's take his fucking wealth and make the rich richer, or let's take the rich's wealth and make the rich poorer. That is what I mean.
Okay.
I fucking absolutely despise artificial egalitarianism. It is a false god and it is vile.
All right, we'll probably be ending shortly, but I've really enjoyed this stream. This has been an interesting stream, and we've covered quite a bit. I think that in conclusion, I'd like to talk about what we kind of think we need going forward, and I'd say that in order to really have that, you need some kind of guidance in order to actually reinstill that sense of meaning, that sense of morality, and that social cohesion into people. And I think that the best way that we can get that is because we're not going to get that from our governments. We're not going to get that from our education system. This is why the right just needs organization. And I think that the best thing to do is to try to work on that. Meeting people IRL, donating to organizations. This is really what I think is the next step, because we need to we realize that there's something missing, and I think that we need to take that step in building it, and I think that's the best way to do it. Well, what does everyone else think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think we can all come together on that point.
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead, Faust.
Well, I just wanted to expand on the definition of organization. Would you include secret societies into the auspice of organizing endeavor?
Sure, as long as they have some effect. If they're effective, absolutely. What would be an example of a secret society?
Well, I mean, there's quite a few of them. I think I can make a strong case that things like the Lions Club, something normal like that is even a secret society. Sure, they have a public face, but unless you're in it, unless you're in the community, you don't really have any idea what they're about or what they're up to. So, there's a lot of effective models for this. And I mean, geez, look to the left. They crop up with secret societies all the time. They just call them nonprofit organizations.
and the NGOs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty funny, actually.
Yeah. Do you have anything in closing to say, Jackson?
He's all fashed out.
All right, no problem. Academic agent, anything to say in closing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I think getting organized is important. I think looking at what the left did that was successful, and not being afraid to mirror some of their tactics. I call it reverse Alinsky. Probably, both in the short run and the long run, needs to be done until the Overton window is completely shifted more towards our side. That's what I'd say.
All right, good. So at that, I think I'll probably call that a stream. It's been pretty interesting. We've covered a great deal of topics, and I would like to have a stream on World War II eventually, because I think that a lot of guys here probably have a lot to say about that. So I'll get around to that eventually, and I'll definitely have Jacktion and Academic Agent on, and you guys can duke it out again over fascism and all that stuff, because it's always fun to have.
I have a quick one. I think I might have been muted for my.
Yeah, go ahead. Any closing statements?
Yeah, my quick closing statement was the whole idea of the sort of hidden societies is that if you go on something like the X board, for years and years we've been puzzling out who these hidden societies actually are. It's really quite fucking simple. And we all know that these hidden societies, the Catholic Church has completely, fucked them off. So these hidden societies are not your friends, no matter what they might tell you, what they might promise you. This is it. The only way we can do this is with a legitimate government. It's not going to be liberalism. It's not going to be, pseudo egalitarianism like academic agent suggested. It's going to be real egalitarianism, a real hierarchy. God at the top, then state, then people, and the state protecting the people. That's the way it's always meant to be.
What I would add is that I do think that secret societies are only really so useful insofar as they maybe can provide you some support. I do think that it does need to be something that's public, and kind of like we had said earlier, there does need to be a kind of a backbone for people to fall back on when either they get doxxed, the media goes after their job and stuff like that. That's really what we need, I think. And there's some good organizations popping up. I do like AIM, American Identity Movement. They seem to be doing decent work. The Distributist created an organization called the Cana Society. They are worth looking into. And yeah, I say that eventually we're going to need things like payment processors and alternative platforms and stuff like that.
I'll just give you guys one word of advice. If you do set up your state, make sure you adopt an economic policy that doesn't involve military expansion to survive. Otherwise, you're fucked.
Yeah, no, imperialism is a waste of time.
Unfortunately, that's what every fascist state did.
Out of economic necessity, we'll leave it there.
Is more fucking inclined on looking. If you want to look at the context of it, Germany didn't really have a lot of option other than to expand back into the Rhinelands because that was their manufacturing capability. Italy, I don't know what the fuck Italy was doing. I will admit that straight up. But if you want to do a proper fascistic state, then there's no point in doing imperialism because imperialism is a fucking headache, and take that from an Englishman.
Yeah, well, if it wasn't for English imperialism, I wouldn't be here today. I'm a colonial. So I don't know. I guess there was that positive. But anyway, hey guys, this has been a great conversation, and we'll do it again sometime. Thanks for listening. Have a good night.
Have a good one.